Hello. Just wanted to check and see if it works. Everybody can hear me? Actually, I can hear me. This is a good room. So I had a couple of questions before I get started. How many native English speakers are in the room? Oh boy. None of these jokes are going to work. All right. How many people in here would consider themselves producers? Oh, okay, that's cool. All right, so those of you who are not producers, how many people are here just so you can get the dirt on the guy that you work with? There, now that's the people I want to talk to. I do one like this for designers too, so look me up. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Becoming a great producer the hard way. I'll get it out of the way first. The easy way, as I just mentioned a couple of minutes ago, probably means you're doing it wrong. The easy way is call yourself a producer, but then do somebody else's job, like a project manager or a designer. I can say that because I worked for both EA Sports and Microsoft, where producers are completely different things, but not always the actual true definition of the word producer. Of course, all this is my opinion, so that means that it's right. But I'm willing to talk about it. So a lot of people think it's important to know who I am. So there's a little bit of credibility. Right now I'm a senior producer at Turn 10. Anybody a big fan of Forza? Horizon? Thank you. One person. That's awesome. Come on, everybody likes race cars, right? Before that it was American football for Madden. Now how many people played that game? There we go. So I had a varied background. There was a time when I thought I was going to be a firefighter or a wrestling coach. I ended up going to art school instead. And then worked a bunch of different jobs at a video game company, including UI designer, which was basically a graphic designer at the time. I got hired because I was the only one in the neighborhood that could use Adobe Illustrator. Let's see, I also was a concept artist because I worked in comic books before that. I worked as a full-fledged game designer for AAA titles such as NFL Street, AFL. These really like niche American football titles that not really going over too well in Cologne, Germany. But please, believe me, they were great. I have been a producer also on a bunch of meaningful titles such as Dora the Explorer, Sesame Street, Dragon Tales. Yeah, there we go. I'll tell you what, I worked in a game called Math Missions. To date, it is the most award-winning title I've ever worked on. Parent Teachers Choice Association, something else like the Scholastic News, things like that. Daycare centers, they all love it. I've been making games since about 1999, 2000. It's kind of fuzzy back then. I was living in New Jersey. A lot of stuff was fuzzy. I've worked on everything from GBA to PC to, of course, now the Xbox One, 360, PS3, PS4, all that kind of stuff. So that's my credibility. Hope it counts. Most of this talk is a series of bullet points about what makes a great producer, and some of them are some uncomfortable truths that I feel very strongly about. Like I said, it's my opinion, so that means that it's right. I'm going to go through, there'll be something, so this is great, all the non-native English speakers, I'm going to have to explain my joke that is a common thread throughout here. So there is, everybody understands what a pro tip is, right? More or less, okay. Expertise. So my friends used to call my little gems, my little pieces of knowledge that I would share, nixpertise. I think and so we'll see that term a lot. And I'll refer to them as pro tips just so it makes sense, hopefully. So let's go ahead and get started. What is a producer? For that, I want to get back to the history of the first video game producer. There is actually some history here and where this title came from. Does anybody know who this guy is? Trip Hawkins. Does anybody know why he's important? Well, if you don't know who he is, you probably don't know why he's important. All right, so he's one of the founding members of EA. He's the guy that actually said, I need a producer for my games. He had people working in various locations, and they were the geniuses, right? These were the artists, the designers, the engineers. They were working very hard on games like Hard Hat Mac, Mule, Back in the day, games were cool. You could make an entire game in 6 months with 8 people. Those days. All right. Anyway, he had a friend whose name was Jerry Moss, one of the most successful music producers in the industry, mostly in rock and roll. Tripp wanted us to be rock stars as game developers. Does anybody remember these? This is what game covers used to look like. It was like 1970s LP album. You'd open it up and it'd have all this trippy artwork in it and have pictures of us in there. We were going to be the rock stars. This is what we were, because he realized working with game developers was a lot like working with rock stars. We were very focused, very creative, moody, other things. So he knew that working with rock stars to get really good stuff from his friend Jerry Moss, that they needed a producer. By the way, does anybody remember this picture? This is the original EA ad. Like, can a computer make you cry? We see further. If that doesn't scream just moody, melodramatic rock star stuff, like this is where we were going. This is where the term producer came from, not movies. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but somewhere about 10 years ago, the reason why this talk exists is somewhere about 10 years ago, I was trying to hire producers at EA, and the people that were showing up were project managers, PMP certified, Sigma, black belt, 6-star kind of stuff, schedule people. Very, very important job, critical to large-scale teams and large-scale success. Not a producer. And I thought, what is going on here? And about 10 years ago, if anybody remembers, that's when we first started having the conversation about our games art, our games the new movies. So I think maybe the idea that movies are sexy, I want to be sexy, so I'm going to be a producer in games. I don't know. It's a leap of logic. Made sense. But in movies, the producer is usually, and there's some differences, but usually the schedule guy and the money guy. So trying to get that image out of your head. Everybody in here that has producer on their business card owes that title to Tripp, who wanted us to be the producers like music producers. It's different. Basically, a producer for a music company, for a rock band, is the balance point of professional creation. This is the guy that keeps the rock stars kind of corralled. He carries the vision when it needs to be carried. He's that tipping point between business, technology, art, creation, marketing. He can speak. He understands the importance to all these things. This is who the producer is for video games. This is the proto-producer for video games. And that's where a lot of this conversation is going to go. Whoops. All right. Nixpertise, a pro tip. Let's go ahead and get started. Hiring a producer is actually very difficult. I told you this story. I'll bring this up a couple of times, but I told you the story about trying to hire a producer, ended up getting a project manager. I always look for producers that are into weird hobbies. Interestingly enough, if you know somebody who's into a weird hobby, something that's different, something that's unique, it's usually a precursor for the ability to have passion. I interviewed somebody, and I said, what do you do when you're not making games? And he said, oh, I'm into underwater photography. I was like, oh, that's pretty weird. You know, that's kind of niche. There's photography, there's scuba diving, you got to do them both at the same time. As it turns out, this guy it was more than that. He was into vintage chemical development of film underwater photography. So he's a lighting expert, a camera expert, kind of a machine expert, half chemist. He's building his own rigs to take cameras that were never supposed to go underwater. He was a problem solver. A lot of what producers do, anybody, no matter what kind of producer are, I'm sure you can understand the power of being a good creative problem solver. This sort of mindset is actually very helpful. I'm also really hesitant about people that want to be in charge. I've never had a good experience with a guy that says, I want to be a producer because I like being in charge. Great. I'll just put you right in charge now. Doesn't work out very well. What I'm interested in is usually people that doesn't even come up in the conversation. Maybe it's buried deep inside. I'm not into repressed emotions of any kind, but at least when it comes out in conversations, it's about bringing this org chart, bringing this organization, bringing it to greatness. helping everybody become something more than that they would be if it was just up to themselves. Great producers are usually like Swiss Army knives. They're jack of all trades. Being a Swiss Army knife means that you can communicate very well with other disciplines, right? I used to be an artist, so I can speak very well to artists. I used to be a designer, so I can speak the language. Anybody that has never been one of the two will see conflict between the two disciplines. Everybody in this room certainly knows about what happens when you put one engineer and one artist together to come up with something. Unmitigated success, right? Because they use all the same language, they have all the same life experiences. Producers are good in this role. The good producers can speak with competence to all disciplines, but in that particular example, to both disciplines. If you can speak competently to the various disciplines, you will build trust. So communication is the first line to building trust. Trust is basically the foundation of getting everybody on board, everybody working towards the same thing, understanding shared priorities, the alignment of the big picture, not just the game, but the studio, not just the studio, but the company, the industry, whatever it is that we're talking about. Does anybody know what a babblefish is? All right, see, now this one's going to work. All right, so when I talk about being a Swiss Army knife, being a jack of all trades, being a babblefish, this is the translator. You are the babblefish for the company. You're the babblefish, maybe a junior producer is working on a small feature. He's essentially the babblefish, the translator for that small team. This is basically a focus on communication, building trust. So it's important to be knowledgeable about these people, about everybody's job. Be very, very clear on what's important to them. Help them solve hard problems, but also know when to step back. So you're familiar and comfortable having that conversation, but you need to value their expertise because, unfortunately, if you're the jack of all trades, you're the master of none, right? You got to go there with that cliche. I love cliches. They exist for a reason because they rhyme. I don't know. I just came up with this talk today. So, once we get, communication is going to be an ongoing topic here. There's a lot of things are going to come back to communication. So, first rule of communication is that simple is always better. Simple. If you're writing an email that's more than 8 sentences long, you need to ask yourself if it needs to be a document. That's the way I feel. So, that's right. Nobody reads long emails anyway, so keep them short. Keep them focused, bullet points, that kind of stuff. It's important, especially communication necessitates that something needs to be listened to or read. Nobody's going to read it. I mean, how else did we come up with the TLDR convention? Because nobody reads stuff. Also, communication is also about talking. This is a really valuable skill to have. A lot of people say, get good at listening, but I don't think anybody really understands what good at listening is. There's a lot of things to it. You should keep notes. I'll talk about that in a second. But there are mechanisms of engagement that you can use when you're talking to somebody, right? You want verbal and nonverbal acknowledgement. I am very, very appreciative of the people in the audience right now that are giving me a little nod of the head. It's a little bit nerve-wracking up here. I was expecting nobody to be here, and now everybody's here. I'll try and get us out by lunch. But the nonverbal sort of nod of the head, or that actually triggers stuff in your own head to stay engaged with the conversation. Also, reserve judgment. We're all smart people, and most of you have claimed that you're producers, so you're automatically problem solvers. I have this problem directly. I jump to this, oh, I know, I'll solve that problem for you, before the person's done explaining it to me. I have to say, I'm not batting a very good, I'm not doing too successful on that particular scenario. Jumping to the conclusion before listening to somebody speak their piece is wrong. Not only does it breaks up the respect, breaks up the trust, but you also don't know the rest of the story. Listening is very important, understanding their perspective. Write it down. Carry a notebook with it wherever you go. Plain and simple, don't trust anybody that goes to a meeting and doesn't bring a notebook. Rolls-Royce. A lot of people out there own Rolls-Royces. Yeah, me too. So they've been making cars, designing cars for 100 years. They've been designing stuff for 100 years. They have a tool called the Design Rationalization Editor. Essentially, building something that's giant and complex and difficult means that as you make decisions, you need to catalog it, right? So it's an encyclopedia of all the decisions and the reasons why these decisions were made. It is, I've seen a picture of it. If you search for a while on the web, you can get it. But the picture is so ugly, it shouldn't be shown in a PowerPoint presentation that are usually so beautiful. But consider that while you're making a car, somebody decides to put a part on an engine that changes the shape of the hood. A supercharger, right? Bolts on the top, so now we need a big bubble on the hood. 6 months down the road, the guy that's designing the hood says, wait, why is this requirement for the giant shape on the hood? He can go back to this tool, the Decision Rationalization Editor, follow the chain of decisions to go back and say, oh, it has to be there because there's this thing that this decision was made, and these are the people that made it. Your notebook, well, I would love to have something as complicated as that because I like complicated software. The notebook is kind of your way to do that. How many people have been in a meeting where a bunch of people said stuff, nodded their head, walked out, and nobody remembered exactly who said what and what was supposed to happen? Yeah, that's right. Now, you've been to this lecture, so you don't have an excuse anymore. You're going to be like, oh, Nick told me. Should have brought my notebook. Also, if you're the guy with the notebook and nobody else brings it, guess who's in charge at the next meeting? Booyah! Anyway, my favorite part about the Rolls-Royce tool, the Decision Rationalization Editor, is the acronym. DREAD. Because could you imagine being in a conversation, you're like, no, this is a terrible choice. We never would have done that. I never would have said that. And they just open up something that looks like Excel but scarier and says, look, here's where you click this button and put all this in motion. I would dread that. Anyway, communication as a producer is really important. This is a good story about complicated products. Anybody remember the Tower of Babel? So king gets together and says, hey, let's make a tower so big we can go up there and talk to God, maybe take over, it'd be cool. Yeah, let's do it. So we build this giant tower, and it's going to be cool. I got a big plan. It's very complicated. Biggest thing that's ever been made before. God thinks, that's not a very good, I don't like this idea anymore. I'm going to change one thing. What did he change? Language. All of a sudden, the artists couldn't talk to the engineers couldn't talk to the designers, and what happened? Failed. What would happen if a good producer was there? I ask you. An expertise, discipline, fundamentals. So one of the scariest things about becoming a producer, especially if you become a producer and you've never been an artist, is I don't really know how this person works. So I'll give you a couple. This is sort of a starting point. So when next time you get into the meeting with your artist and you can't understand what he's talking about, the most important thing to an artist is to be on model. The art director has set a visual target for him. Dear God, if this hasn't already happened, you need to go. There's other problems. But the art director has set a visual target. The artist needs to make sure that it looks like that. That's the most important thing. Once you can communicate around that point, this is very simplistic, of course, but I'm trying to boil it down. It's only one slide. I got to talk about the other two disciplines. So engineers, always interested about optimization. Whether it's putting more pixels on the screen, whether it's less milliseconds for more frames, or putting the power of content creation in a content creator's hand through a tool. This is optimization. Design, always focused on the user experience. What is the intent behind the design? What is the user supposed to do, feel, accomplish, move on to with this mode or this feature? How many people in here would consider themselves designers? Now put your hand down if you are a producer or a designer but not a producer. Aha. So that's pretty common. EA left that model that I described earlier on and moved towards all producers were designers. And now they're kind of, depends on where you work, but essentially it became synonymous, right? Designer and producer. And you ended up having a lot of holes in the game as far as having the entrepreneurial understanding of the business, the marketing beats, technical components and things like that. And how many producers are not designers find designers difficult to work with? Come on, liar. Okay. Yeah. So as long as we stay focused, I just kind of wanted to see how many producers find it difficult to work with engineers. That's interesting. So find something common that you can both agree on and build from there. There's a lot of books written on this stuff. All right, so leadership. Everybody talks about leadership. This is a big one. I think I mentioned before, any one of these slides in this talk could go on. It could be, entire books are written on all this stuff. I said it was hard. Doesn't mean it's not simple. So let's talk leadership. A lot of people think, oh, it's about motivation. Get you the carrot or the stick. In reality, it's more like this. I'll pay you or I'll fire you. But this is control. This is not actual motivation. Motivation is when usually what happens when somebody else makes their own personal liberty, personal decision to go ahead and move in the same direction. And that's done through influence. So there's you, the thoughts inside your head. That's the center of that bullseye. After that, those are your actions. Now, your actions are actually far more limited than most people think. Your actions are essentially what you can type out on your keyboard, what you can draw up on your whiteboard, the kind of clothes you wear, I guess. The next ring outside that's your influence. That's actually where people interact with you the most. Your influence. And that's how you treat people. That's the tone that you have. That's your credibility. Those are the things that will start to influence people. That is where actual leadership starts for broad groups. Personal leadership is completely different. That's about self-control. Different talk. Once you're in that position, you'll find that you really need to understand how people learn, how people communicate. Just like I talked about speaking to different disciplines, it's also about speaking different ways to different disciplines. So I think this is probably familiar to most people. Some people need to see it in order to get it. Some people need to hear it explained to them very clearly in order to get it. Some people actually need to do it in order to get it. Most people are kind of very different degrees of this. Once you know that about the person that you're working with, your communication becomes a lot better. This is very difficult, and it takes some contemplative, thoughtful study about yourself, how you communicate, and the reactions of the people around you. Then, the secret to being a good producer, here it is. This is it. Learning how to nag constantly but not annoy people. If you've been a producer, you've been really worried about something, and the guy or the girl is like, don't worry, I got it. You're like, So leadership to me is also about setting standards, right? You need to have something to achieve in order to set people up to overachieve. A standard is very explicit. We will do this thing that will work this way, and it will be done on Thursday. So if it's more, or if it's done sooner, that's overachieving. Anything else, you're playing a very nebulous game. And the larger, that might work when it's only 2 or 3 people. It works when it's about 12 people. At 30 people, it gets a little bit rough. Anything more than that, not having really clear, explicit standards and requirements and expectations on each other, yourself and the other teams around you, it starts to get really tough to go ahead and be predictable in order to keep everybody engaged. So I like the idea of overkill. Only you can't overkill something until you know what you're going to kill. And also, again, cliche, exists for a reason, right? Distribute the credit, take the blame. You are the most visible person of that particular product, that particular thing that you own. There's no way around it. And people see right away when you don't work this way. And then that influence turns into something negative. More pro tips. Meetings. Particular pet peeve of mine. I worked at EA. Has anybody here worked at EA before? All right. So would you say I have not enough meetings at EA? Just the right amount meetings? Or too much meetings? Now, how many people worked at EA and also somewhere along in their career worked at Microsoft? All right, Microsoft does some meetings. So I have a couple of rules that I put into place. Meetings are only in the morning. Oh God, how can we do that? It actually works out very, very well. One, your day starts as early as it can. Whatever time that is, that's up to you guys. Two, it keeps everything pretty short. And one of the things in keeping it short means you go into it knowing exactly what you got to get out of it. Everybody's prepared. Decisions don't get made in meetings. This is important as well. Consensus gets made in meetings, and then somebody, you might not know who it is when you walk in the door, but somebody makes a decision based on that consensus, right? A group of people come to consensus, a person makes a decision. Also, bring a notebook. All right, so this is cool. I go to Germany and I show up with a baseball analogy. But actually, it's not that bad because I think one out of every 10 people I passed on the way here from the Frankfurt airport had a Yankees hat on. So everybody's familiar with the idea of pitching, right? This is where you're trying to sell your product, sell your mode. So a producer basically pitches in both directions, up the chain and down the chain constantly. Up the chain to get the investment and make sure that, no executive gets too paranoid, or also puts the money in. But also down. You're constantly selling down in order to keep engagement. Here's how we're going to work this feature for you. Here's how it meets your desires. Here's how we're going to be successful. It works both ways. It constantly happens. It is essentially a constant act of persuasion in both directions. So this actually, now that I think about it, which was this morning, this actually hasn't worked out really well at all. So I go to Germany and I put a picture of baseball guys on the slide, and then I show a pretty famous Greek guy. But it's Aristotle, so that should count for something. You didn't expect a mini Greek history lesson here. So pitching is about the art of persuasion. The art of persuasion is otherwise also referred to as rhetoric. Rhetoric, this is the guy that wrote the book on it, Aristotle, and he basically says in order to persuade somebody, and he says it's, by the way, when he was talking about rhetoric is very positive. Now we hear it on the news and we hear it in conversation where rhetoric is a negative thing. Well, in this case, this is just about sharing information and persuading somebody of your point, not necessarily mindlessly blathering along. He basically says that there's three components to rhetoric. There's ethos, which is street cred, right? I had my first slide up there. I've made a couple of video games, and I've been a producer for a while, so hopefully you're willing to listen to me for at least 45 minutes. There's logos, which is demonstrable skill. Here's a game that I made, or here's a chart that I came up with. This is a physical thing. This is a tangible fact that we can all kind of gather around and observe. And then there's pathos. Pathos is what we refer to that now as narrative. Has anybody been in a meeting where you're trying to pitch a green light and somebody says, yeah, but what's the narrative? It's a lot of conversation about what's the story behind the marketing. And essentially, it was all here a few thousand years ago, right? So street cred, data, and narrative. He probably hates that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about project management. I mentioned that the birth of this talk came from project managers coming in to job description that asked for producers. Some of these project managers with their PMP certification turned into good producers, but they didn't start off that way. I don't want to downsell the importance of a project manager. The person that maintains the schedule is critical to success for pretty much any size team, but especially as teams get larger. So sometimes people are like, oh, you just want to use the term schedule monkey. I'm like, no, I've done that job. I know what it feels like on the inside. I want a job well done, because the schedule Tetris and Microsoft Project or whatever all works out. I feel very strongly this is a critical discipline. And when I talked about a producer being able to speak to all the other disciplines, this is probably one that they need to know as much, if not more, than the others. I'm going to boil this one down to a simple sentence as well. It's about the priorities and the capacity. Understand the priorities of your game and the capacity to do that. And then whatever fits makes it, whatever doesn't goes away. It's almost black and white. It's complicated. Priorities change. from pre-production to production to shutting it down, so you're constantly moving. There's a lot of moving parts to get it that way. This is a very specialized role. You need to understand it, but once your team gets too big, it's better to have one person focused on this. I would say that is probably anywhere between anything upwards of 15 people in your team. More expertise, task estimations. This is very important stuff. This is critical. In fact, in most cases, an individual developer on a game team, there's very little work that they do that's more important than estimating their tasks. Making this clear to everybody is important. Livelihoods are at stake, right? $1 million decisions are made, whether we're going to have this feature or that feature, simply based on whether an engineer says, yeah, I could do that by Thursday, and be right about it. A lot of people sit down in a room and they'll do this thinking time and doing time and the same thing. They're like, well, it'll probably take me about 2 days to figure it out, and then I could probably close the loop in another 2 days after that. I don't subscribe to that in the same meeting. You think about it. How long is it going to take you to do your R&D? About 2 days. Okay, we'll talk in 2 days. Then you come back and then we go ahead. We have a fresh perspective on it. I also do not like the answer that says, I won't know until I start. How many people deal with that? We just had a question here in the last talk where the guy says, oh, well, all that about story points is great, but I'm a designer and we work outside the system, right? Was anybody here for that? All right, so I grabbed him on the way out. And I said very clearly, I said, we're professionals. We have work to do. We have tasks and we have timelines. Engineers have R&D assignments, and essentially what you need, what you're talking about is needing to do, a designer needs to do some R&D, build a prototype, roll some dice, figure it out, time box it, figure it, understand. Some people say, well, I don't know anything about that system. Well, how are you going to know? Well, I'm going to have to read this book. How many pages is a book? 400 pages. How long is it going to take you to read 400 pages, right? We can start to work our way down to start to block out time. It's disingenuous to go ahead and say that this is okay, you just go ahead and tell me when you're ready, because livelihoods are at stake. So let's talk a little bit about shutting down. Coming to the end of the talk, so let's talk about final, closing, alpha, beta, depends on where you come from. But this is basically when game development gets real, right? How many people are in the middle of shutting down a game right now? Yeah, there we go. What are you doing here? Forza ships on September 15th. All right. So when we talk about shutting down, the producer becomes even more visible than they normally are. You need to project some confidence. Right? The times are tough right now. You're the most visible. Everybody sees you. So don't mess it up. You got to solve problems. You got to close threat. I do want to point out, this looks like a real problem. This guy's clearly not in an airplane. His parachute's pointed in the wrong direction, and I think it's on fire. I don't know where I found this picture, but it's horrifying. You're also the guy that's in charge. You're the one that's going to see the biggest picture. You're going to see you're going to see all the different aspects. Everybody else is kind of down doing their job, doing as well as they can, but they still need the information that keeps them engaged, keeps them motivated, keeps them making the right decisions. This is the producer's job. I'm kind of going in and out of saying you and saying the producer. I wish I had a reason for doing that other than just lazy English, but hopefully I'm not confusing anybody. A lot of people think that being the producer is finally freedom. Been an engineer for so long, but now that I'm a producer, I can do things my way. I always tell people, don't stop being an engineer. It's actually the opposite. Whereas many other people on the team have sort of the freedom to focus, you're chained to make sure that everybody else has even more freedom to focus, even more ability to be effective. You're chasing threads all day long. And you have to be happy the whole time because everybody looks at you. So I got a last Nixpertise pro tip for you. I couldn't figure out where to fit this into the deck, but this is really important to me. Distractions. As a producer, you probably have some sort of influence over this, or you should. Now, when I started making video games, I didn't actually get email on my computer until year 3. It was before the iPhone or Facebook, and we did a lot of work. And I know it sounds like I'm anti-fun, but you got to really keep your eye on that stuff. When I moved from the small company I worked for in New Jersey down to Orlando, Florida to work for EA, I made it very, very clear that I wanted all these insurance salesman booths, the cubicles, out. We wanted an open floor plan. 10 years later, I think that was probably one of the worst crusades I ever had. Open floor plan is cool because we think it's cool because of the collaboration it takes to do this work, and that is true. And sometimes having 2 people sit very close in an open floor plan in an open environment is very good. Usually works very well when 2 designers are working on a feature, or a designer and artist are working on a feature, or designer and engineer, or 2 engineers working on a very complicated system. That's okay, maybe especially if they're the right personality. But what I didn't realize was that when we moved all those cubicles to open floor plan at Tiburon, we didn't have any collaborative space. So the collaborative space became the cubicles. So you put 4 people in a larger sort of cubicle pit. They would attract 2 or 3 people, and then you'd have 6, 7, 8 people not working because of the distraction. There's a very interesting article written on Wired a couple years ago about the cost of an interruption. Thought workers, stuff that we do, engineers, designers, artists, they need time to focus, have contiguous hours together in a chain. It takes about 15 minutes to get into the zone. And then it takes about 15 minutes to wind down, solve the other person's problem when they get interrupted, and then 15 minutes to get back up. You are literally losing hours by allowing unnecessary interruptions. So keep your collaborative space, but set some rules around the open cubicle stuff. Headphones. What's happening right now at Turn 10 is we have these little lights that respond to Messenger or Skype. So it's green when you're available, red when you're in a meeting. You use the do not disturb setting, and it'll set itself to red. So we're trying to leave people alone and let them focus. That, and get meetings into the morning so that you've got all this contiguous time at the end of the day, will make huge changes in the amount of efficiency, the amount of production that can happen. It also gives people the chance to focus on stuff that they really care about. They wouldn't be working and doing these things if they didn't really care about engineering or art or anything like that. So earlier this week, I tweeted out, if you had to describe what a producer does in 3 words or less, what would you use? This one's mine, a force multiplier. It takes a lot of great people to make a game. It takes many people. If you're not making them better at their job every day, then you are not doing your job. Thank you very much. I know everybody's got lunch plans, but I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions or chit-chat.
Hi, thank you for a very inspiring talk.
Thank you.
I have a very small team. We are just 4 people. If you have a tiny team with maybe just 1 or 2 game designer and 1 programmer that also does project management, and 1 CDO that also does all the business stuff.
Yeah.
Who do you think would be the best suited to be the producer?
In that environment, it sounds like the CEO. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
And the reason why I would pick that person is because it's a very small group, and the CEO probably has perspective to things like business plans, P&Ls, marketing beats, marketing calendars, partnerships, licensing. And those are important for a producer to at least be knowledgeable about while development continues.
Cool, thanks.
Hi, thanks. It was a great talk. I'm a game designer slash producer in my company.
You got to pick one.
Yeah, well,
No.
they're the ones who determined it. So yeah, my card only says one. Yeah, but our games are, although it's a big company, our games pretty much every designer slash producer has their own game. So
Okay.
you don't really you have very limited input from other game designers. So the question is, do you think it's a good idea to combine both jobs, or does it depend on the situation?
How big is the team?
The team for each individual game, you mean?
For each one of these individual, I guess, they're games or features?
They're games.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then how big is that?
It varies, but it could go, including graphic designers and stuff, you mean, right? Could go 10 to 12 people.
You're probably still safe with somebody doing some cross-discipline work there, but you're definitely at the point. This lady here, she said the team was 4 people, is that right? So in that case, that cross-discipline there is I think that's viable as well. It sounds like everybody's already doing a couple of different jobs anyway. Yeah. But soon, 15 people gets hard. I remember I went to art school, so I was really sad the day that I realized I was not doing art anymore. I was just a producer. I got over it.
Hello.
Hello.
So you spoke about distractions
Yes.
in teams during working hours, which affect the efficiency, obviously.
Yes.
So if you were to try to make it more effective and take out, for example, I don't know, Facebook access, let's say, this will obviously affect the morale of the team.
Right.
You've taken something away from us.
Yeah.
So how do you work that?
So I would never.
How do you make it work?
Yeah. How do you control distractions? You could certainly be sort of this despotic, tyrannical ruler and turn off access. I don't think that's the right way to go. I think it's just better to acknowledge, have a conversation. These are distractions. Distractions stop us from focusing, and just be aware of it moving forward. If it becomes a problem, then it's just like any other problem you might have on a team, where you might have to address it. I don't know that I would go around and start to create draconian rules about internet access or anything like that, because it makes things pretty sad. There's somebody over here.
Hi, thank you for the speech.
Oh, thank you.
What about having the producer work to be split by different people, like a core team having a programmer, an artist, and a designer, and to coordinate their job like if they were coordinated by a single person? So having more a team that do the producer job.
Are you saying, you're asking if a small team of 3 people would need a fourth producer?
Having a project directed by 3 people instead of a single person.
Oh, like a triumvirate?
Yeah.
Sure. I've seen that work. Usually it's the 3 people are very good friends and have known each other for a very long time, and it's worked pretty well. In that case, sort of they make a decision and they all get together, and they fight it out on their own, but they stay. Then the decision, as long as the 3 people are saying the same thing, singing from the same sheet of music, giving the same direction after they kind of go their separate ways, it works. It works. It gets bad after a while, but I mean, when the team gets really big, it gets a little bit unsustainable.
Yeah. Thank you.
Way over there.
Hi, thanks
Hello.
for the great talk.
Thank you.
From my experience, producers are one of the worst risks for a project because they are always a single point of failure.
I know.
They get lovesick.
We're the
they
worst.
Get suicidal, and then the project is gone. How do you handle this?
Let me get. Are you an engineer?
No, I'm a producer.
Oh, okay. So I want to rephrase the question, make sure that I get it, because you had a very salient point there. Producers are often the worst risk to a project because they can be a single point of failure. Yeah. That's a terrible producer. In a position where you are, where I would consider that a hub position, a hub personality, a leadership role, you could be the single point of failure. All of a sudden you get hit by the lottery, and you go spend your millions somewhere else, the team kind of falls apart. This is not necessarily indicative of the role producer, but it makes sense in the fact that a person's responsible for the livelihoods and the production of a group, a business. To allow one person, yourself or anybody else, to be a single point of failure is a failure process for this producer. There needs to be backup plans. There needs to be communication throughout. I have certainly worked on projects where the creative director had to leave, and we all just stood around and looked at each other because we didn't know what the most important thing was. And we just kind of worked on some things in random until he got back. And then we said, "God, we're really glad you're back." And he realized, and he's since corrected his ways, but he's highly communicative, puts stuff on the wall, sort of make sure that everybody knows what's the most important thing. That's what a producer needs to do for himself as well. Make sure that the team is enabled in success, whether he's a failure point or not. How's that? Did I kind of get there? Not at all. Did anybody else like that answer? Thank you. Okay. We'll talk later.
Hello. You mentioned that you have to get the best out of your team as a producer.
Yes.
But also you said you're a jack of all trades, but a master of none. So if you're a master of none, how can you actually do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you're not necessarily a master of marketing, how are you sure you're getting the best out of your marketing team? Yeah, that you could certainly get caught in a bad position in that case. But I would consider you need to know your limitations. And when I say a jack of all trades, that means that you at least recognize goodness and greatness when it exists. Say, that was a really good job, but I never would have thought that, but that was great. Anything less than that, you're probably not doing it a good service, and then it's about hiring the right people. But it's true. In fact, to go back to the thing that I really messed up, this guy's question, you could do a really bad job of thinking, I totally know everything there is to know about big data, and then hire the wrong guy and never ask the right questions and really get yourself in a hole. So self-awareness is critical. Self-awareness for stuff like that is only going to come through study of other people's responsibilities. I was never an engineer, but I spent a lot of time learning how to compile code and take all those little Coursera courses and stuff like that, just so I know what I was talking about. This is back in the days when we used Weiss installers on our PC products. Does anybody do that work anymore? No. All right. Dinosaur up here, people.
Any more questions? We still have a few minutes left.
Very thankful that everybody, I'm very appreciative. I'm humbled by the fact that everybody's still here because it's lunchtime.
Do you have any advice for co-located teams? Because I have, for example, an artist in Sweden, a game designer in America, and a development team in India. And so doing meetings and everything is a nightmare.
So you're the producer for a distributed team?
Yep.
And they are all over the world.
They're all over the world.
Where are you based?
UK.
Oh, all over the world. Okay. See if you could hire somebody in Africa, because you're missing one or two.
I wouldn't put it past my CEO.
One of my favorite jobs of all time was NFL Street 3. I worked in Orlando as the producer with the designer and an art director, but the team was in Oregon, which is about as far as you can get on the American continent apart. And our test team was in England. So travel, I know it's not always viable, but the single best answer to that as a producer is you're the face of the product, up and down. So travel is important, whether you bring teams to you or you go out to the teams. There's nothing better than that. Number 2 is Skype, and it is a distant number 2. The other thing is however you do it, there's Google Docs and shared services and OneNote and all sorts of interesting stuff. However you do it, treat it as a ritual, this shared living document of updates, status, news, calendars, that sort of stuff that everybody can check in on at any time. There's Basecamp. I've seen Facebook actually work for things like that for smaller teams. But it becomes overhead, the cost of doing business when you've got a distributed group that much. The other thing is even more important for a distributed group than it is with a local group is the establishment of standards and priorities. Explicit, ruthlessly explicit priorities and standards. Because when you and I speak, we speak the same language, we stand next to each other, there's all sorts of body language, there's shared experiences that make the communication really solid and tight that's absent when you're not together. So the more and more explicit and clear and rigid your expectations, standards become, the easier it is for people to understand and work through them when they're distributed. They got to make decisions while you're asleep, so they better be making the right ones. Is there one all the way in the back? Oh,
yeah,
right here.
Yeah, thank you for the great talk. How would you compare the role of a producer with a sports team coach?
Yes. Now you're talking my language. So there are different styles to producers. All right, so I said this was my opinion, and it is. And there are other versions of producer that work. This version of this producer that you see is heavily based on sports team coach. There are a lot of similarities where you're motivating, you are cultivating, you're teaching a lot of the time. You're also letting people go and do they are winning or losing, succeeding or failing on the field by themselves. That's a very, very important thing to be a coach and to be a producer, because you can't fix everybody's code or straighten out anybody's animations or run and do all the marketing. You need to make sure that everybody's got the explicit standards and requirements to make the right decisions and go out and do it themselves. I draw a lot of comparisons. Another one that I'm comfortable with is film director. So if the producer is the money and the schedule guy, and the writer is the sort of the vision, the director is the one that understands how important a schedule is, but also understands how to get the most out of film, how to emotionally engage viewers. So he is that sort of multifaceted. Another analog that works for me.
So some people say that a producer's role is to make themselves redundant over time. What's your thoughts on that? Like, do you try to create a team that's as efficient as possible so that if you do sort of fuck off for 6 months, they can continue working? Or
Yes, yeah. First, is that a bow tie?
Yes, it is.
Awesome. Second, I wouldn't relegate that statement to producer. So I often have conversations with people that report to me, hey, what can I do to be promoted? I said, make sure that I don't miss you when I give you another job. So you always want to have a succession plan. I'm on a little bit of a tangent. You always want to have a succession plan, so somebody that can come and take your place, but not everybody has that sort of role. So I recommend people to do a lot of post-process documentation, a nice little 3-ring binder of Developer Joe. So if Developer Joe gets promoted to technical director or gets hit by the lottery and spends his millions in the Bahamas, I can have that little 3-ring binder, which is probably some sort of digital Trello, I don't know, some sort of fancy thing. But I can give that to the next person so that they can basically get up to speed as soon as possible. So as a blanket statement, yes, everybody should be looking to grow and looking to improve. As a producer, I feel like I'm at my most successful when I can look a little bit further, because the team behind me is so aligned and so buttoned up, squared away, clear with the requirements, that they won't miss me while I'm gone for a couple of days. wandering the forest thinking about the next idea.
Cool. Cheers.
Any more questions?
We got like 5 minutes, guys. Let's...
So, hi, great talk. And you were pretty, well, you made the distinction very clear between a project manager and a producer. So what would you, to reiterate, say what is the most important difference between the two roles?
Sure. There are a lot of distinction between the producer and the project manager. The project manager, so I've talked about the producer being the tipping point, the inflection point between all the disciplines that make a game. The business, the art, the technology, the design, being able to keep everybody aligned and understand the most important things there. That also includes the schedule. So when we say business, sometimes that includes marketing, and that includes P&L, and that includes schedule as well. A project manager is less focused with that multitude, those facets, as they are focused with the day-to-day, sprint-to-sprint execution of the project. The priorities of the current environment, whether that's the week, the crisis, the sprint, the whole project itself, and how they slot in to the development schedule as a whole. It is shifting sands on almost every game I've ever worked on. It is complicated stuff with exciting curveballs and wrinkles and interesting stuff that happens every day. So I just want to be overly clear that I'm not diminishing that role, but I feel like it gets diminished when you call them producers because you're asking them to do too many things at once that don't necessarily let them focus. Let people that would otherwise be great project managers focus on that. Priorities, capacity. I see somebody back there? No? All right. Oh, again. Yeah, sure.
Just a quick question. If you notice someone in the team that starts cheating about times, like for example, if he's supposed to work 8 hours, but he shows up at 11 and leaves at 4 while you are on vacation.
Yes.
How do you communicate that to him? Do you wait that you are back at the office, or can you use email or Skype?
Well, what you're talking about is if somebody's skipping out of a couple of hours of work, coming in late because they're not because maybe the boss isn't there. That's a disciplinary thing. It should always be done face to face. However, if they're coming in at 11 and leaving at 4, but still doing all the work that they said they would, you can't get mad at them. You just need to give them more work.
Cool, thanks.
So I wanted to leave you with one image. Oh, but it got taken away. I want to leave you with, So I think everybody in this room has heard, I'm a producer. Really, what do you do? Oh, it's like herding cats. I want to be really clear. I hate this answer. I think that herding cats first kind of sounds like you don't know how hard it is. Cats just have to be cats, right? They just run around and be cats. It also sounds like it's difficult, but I think if you had a pillowcase, you could herd a lot of cats really easy. Being a producer is a lot harder than herding cats, right? This is wrong. If there is a person who's responsible for the glue or the component that makes a team of people better than just a group of individuals, it would be the responsibility of the producer. Force multiplier, right? All right. Thank you very much, everybody.